The waste bins behind the food cart rattled again. Trevor Walsh wiped down his counter and pretended not to hear it. Station Meridian had rats the size of small dogs, and he had learned long ago that some problems solved themselves if you ignored them. He packed away the last of his unsold rice bowls and checked the credit reader one final time. 43 credits for the whole day. Barely enough to keep the cart running. The rattling grew louder. Trevor sighed and grabbed his cleaning rag. If something had gotten into his storage unit, he would have to deal with it now before it spoiled tomorrow's ingredients. He walked around the cart and stopped cold. 3 pairs of golden eyes stared back at him from the shadows. They were not rats. They were scaled, about the size of large dogs, with wings folded tight against their backs. Smoke drifted from their nostrils as they watched him with an intelligence that made his skin prickle. One of them, the largest, positioned itself protectively in front of the other 2. Dragons. Actual dragons. Trevor had seen pictures of the Dragon Empire ships that occasionally passed through the outer spiral. Everyone knew about the Radiant Throne and its fearsome rulers, but he had never seen a dragon up close. These 3 looked young, their scales dull and scratched. The smallest one had a torn piece of silver fabric tangled around its leg. They were also clearly starving. The protective one hissed when Trevor took a step forward. He raised his hand slowly and backed toward his cart. The dragons watched him but did not attack. Trevor opened his cooling unit and pulled out a container of leftover chicken and vegetables. He had planned to eat it himself for dinner, but something about those golden eyes made him reconsider. He dumped the food onto 3 disposable plates and set them on the ground, then backed away several steps. The dragons did not move at first. They looked at the food, then at Trevor, then back at the food. The smallest one whimpered softly. Finally, the protective one crept forward and sniffed the nearest plate. It took a careful bite, then another, then began eating in desperate gulps. The other 2 rushed forward and devoured their portions just as quickly. Trevor watched them eat and felt something twist in his chest. He had spent 6 years in the military as a cook, feeding soldiers who fought in battles he never fully understood. After the border wars ended, he drifted from station to station until he landed here, selling cheap meals to dock workers who barely looked at him. He had forgotten what it felt like to feed someone who truly needed it. When the plates were empty, the dragon sat back and looked at him again. The protective one tilted its head, and Trevor could swear he saw gratitude in those strange eyes. "You 3 are a long way from home," Trevor said quietly. "Where did you come from?" The dragons did not answer, of course, but they did not leave either. They settled down near the waste bins, curled together like puppies. The smallest one closed its eyes and began to purr, a sound like distant thunder. Trevor knew he should report this. Station security would want to know about dragons living in the service corridors, but something stopped him. These were children, lost and alone. If he called security, who knew what would happen to them? Would they be captured? "Sent away, hurt?" He made a decision. "All right," he said. "You can stay here tonight. But keep quiet, understand?" The protective dragon nodded. Actually nodded like it understood every word. Trevor felt a chill run down his spine. These were not simple animals. They were people, just in a different form. And they were in trouble. He went back to his cart and pulled out more food. Rice, vegetables, some protein bars he kept for emergencies. He laid it all out and watched the dragons eat more slowly this time, savoring each bite. When they finished, the smallest one crept forward and touched his hand with its nose. The scales were warm and surprisingly soft. "You need names," Trevor said, thinking out loud. "You with the dark scales, I'll call you Ash. The one with the copper shine, you're Cinder. And the little one here is Flare." Ash chirped softly as if approving the choice. Trevor sat down on the ground and leaned against his cart. The dragons arranged themselves around him, their body heat keeping away the chill of the station's artificial night. He should have been afraid. These creatures could probably kill him with a single breath of fire. But instead he felt peaceful. "I'll take care of you," Trevor promised quietly, "until you find your way home." Flare rested her head on his knee and closed her eyes. Cinder curled up beside him. Ash remained alert, watching the corridor for danger, but even she seemed to relax in his presence. Trevor stayed there until his back ached and his legs went numb. When the dragons finally fell asleep, he carefully extracted himself and returned to his quarters. He would come back tomorrow night with more food. And the night after that. For as long as they needed him, he did not know their story. He did not know how they ended up alone on this forgotten station, but it did not matter. They were children and they were hungry, and he could help. That was enough. 3 months changed everything. Trevor no longer dreaded closing his food cart each night. Instead, he found himself watching the clock, waiting for the moment when he could pack up his supplies and slip into the service corridor where 3 dragons waited in the shadows. They had become the best part of his day, the only thing that made the endless routine of station life bearable. He learned their personalities quickly. Ash was the leader, always alert and protective. She had started bringing him gifts in the second week, small stones that glittered in the dim light. Trevor kept them in his pocket like treasures. Cinder was curious about everything, poking her nose into his cart and making soft questioning sounds when he cooked. Flare was the gentle one, always the first to greet him with an affectionate nuzzle. Tonight, Trevor had prepared something special. He had spent extra credits on fresh vegetables and real meat, not the synthetic protein he usually used. He arranged the food on proper plates and carried them carefully through the maintenance passages. The dragons were already waiting. They had learned his schedule and always arrived exactly on time. Flare chirped excitedly when she saw him, bouncing on her front legs like a happy dog. Cinder's eyes locked onto the plates, and even Ash allowed herself a pleased rumble. "Dinner is served," Trevor said with a smile. They ate together in comfortable silence. Trevor had started bringing his own meal so they could share the experience. He found himself talking to them while they ate, telling them stories about Earth. They seemed to love hearing about oceans and forests, things that did not exist on space stations. "There are these trees called redwoods," Trevor said, gesturing with his fork. "They grow so tall you cannot see the top from the ground. Some of them are thousands of years old. I saw them once before I joined the military." Ash tilted her head, listening intently. She had started understanding more words each week. Sometimes Trevor swore she was about to speak, but she never did. Not in any language he could understand anyway. After dinner, Cinder brought him a flower. It was unlike anything Trevor had seen before, with petals that glowed faintly blue. Where had she found it? The station had no gardens, no natural plants at all. The dragons must have a hiding place somewhere beyond his little corner of the service corridors. "It's beautiful," Trevor said, accepting the gift carefully. "Thank you." Cinder purred and rubbed against his side. The peaceful moment shattered when footsteps echoed down the corridor. Trevor's heart jumped into his throat. The dragons immediately tensed, ready to flee or fight. "Walsh, that's you down here?" Trevor recognized the voice. Briggs, one of the station security officers, a man who asked too many questions and enjoyed his authority too much. "Yeah, just doing some cleaning," Trevor called back, shoving the plates behind his cart. The dragons had already vanished into the shadows, silent as ghosts. Briggs appeared around the corner, his uniform crisp despite the late hour. He swept his flashlight across the corridor and frowned. "Station manager says there have been strange noises in this sector. Scratching sounds. Mechanical failures. You heard anything unusual?" "Just the usual rats," Trevor said, keeping his voice casual. "This whole section needs better maintenance." Briggs studied him for a long moment. Trevor forced himself to meet the officer's eyes without flinching. Finally, Briggs grunted and lowered his flashlight. "Keep an ear out. If you see anything suspicious, report it immediately." Of course, Briggs left, but his footsteps stopped just around the corner. Trevor's pulse hammered in his ears. Was the officer waiting? Testing him. After what felt like forever, the footsteps resumed and faded into the distance. Trevor let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. The dragons emerged from the darkness, and he could see fear in their eyes. Ash was trembling slightly, her scales raised in distress. "It's okay," Trevor whispered, reaching out to stroke her neck. "You're safe. I won't let anyone hurt you." But even as he said it, doubt crept into his mind. How long could he keep this secret? Briggs was suspicious now. Other officers might start investigating. And what if someone discovered the dragons by accident? Flare pressed against him, seeking comfort. Trevor wrapped his arms around her warm body and felt her heartbeat against his chest. These children trusted him completely. They had no one else. That night, after the dragons reluctantly left for their hiding place, Trevor lay awake in his quarters. He had overheard dock workers talking earlier in the day. More military ships were passing through the system. Trade routes were shifting. Something was happening in the wider galaxy, but information was scarce this far out in the outer spiral. He thought about the torn silver fabric Flare had been wearing when he first found them. The way Ash carried herself with natural authority, the intelligence in their eyes that went beyond animal cunning. These were not ordinary dragons, if any dragon could be called ordinary. They came from somewhere important. Someone was probably looking for them. Trevor rolled over and stared at the ceiling. He should have reported them that first night. Every day he kept silent made things worse. But how could he betray them now? They had become his family, the first real connection he had felt since leaving Earth. Tomorrow he would make them something special again. Maybe pancakes if he could get the ingredients. Ash had seemed fascinated when he described them last week. Tomorrow he would worry about Briggs and security and consequences. Tonight, he just wanted to remember the sound of Flare purring and the grateful look in Ash's golden eyes. Some things were worth the risk. The ships appeared without warning. Trevor was serving lunch to a group of dock workers when every screen on Station Meridian flickered and changed to the same image. Warships, dozens of them, arranged in a formation that made his military training scream danger. They were beautiful and terrifying, their hulls decorated with patterns that looked like scales. Dragon Empire vessels. "All station personnel, this is Commander Price," a voice crackled over the speakers. "We are under observation by the Radiant Throne Fleet. Remain calm and await further instructions." The dock workers abandoned their food and rushed toward the viewports. Trevor stood frozen behind his cart, his blood turning to ice. He knew. Somehow he knew exactly why that fleet had come. They were looking for 3 lost children. He closed his cart early, ignoring the complaints from waiting customers. His hands shook as he packed away supplies. The dragons. He had to reach them before anyone else did. He had to warn them, protect them, something. The corridors were crowded with panicking station residents. Rumors flew faster than station gossip usually traveled. The dragons were here to conquer. No, they were searching for criminals. No, they were demanding tribute. Everyone had a different theory and none of them were good. Trevor pushed through the crowds and made his way to the service corridors. He moved faster than he should have, drawing attention, but he did not care anymore. When he finally reached their usual meeting spot, the dragons were already there. All 3 of them were pressed against the wall, scales raised in fear. Ash saw him first and made a desperate sound, something between a whimper and a roar. She rushed to him and pushed her head against his chest, trembling. "I know," Trevor said, wrapping his arms around her. "I know why they're here." Cinder and Flare joined them, creating a huddle of warm scales and frightened breathing. Trevor felt like his heart was being torn in half. He had known this moment would come eventually. Deep down, he had always known he would have to give them up, but not like this. Not with warships and fear and uncertainty. Ash pulled back and looked at him. She opened her mouth, and for the first time, Trevor heard her speak. The words were rough and barely formed, but unmistakably human language. Taken. Enemy. Lost. Trevor stared at her. "You were kidnapped? Someone took you from your family?" Ash nodded frantically. She touched the torn silver fabric still tied around Flare's leg, then gestured upward toward the fleet hanging in space above them. "That's your mother up there?" Trevor asked. "In those ships?" Another nod. Flare began to cry, making soft whimpering sounds. Cinder pressed against Trevor's leg, seeking comfort. Trevor's mind raced. They had not run away. They had been stolen and escaped somehow. Ended up lost in the massive sprawl of Station Meridian. For months, their mother had been searching. He tried to imagine that kind of fear, that kind of desperate love. What would he have done if his children had vanished? The station speakers crackled to life again. "Attention, all residents. The Radiant Throne has issued an ultimatum. They are searching for 3 royal children. Any information regarding their whereabouts must be reported immediately. All quarters will be searched within the next 6 hours. Cooperation is mandatory." Trevor felt the world narrow to a single point of clarity. 6 hours. He had 6 hours to figure out what to do. 6 hours before Briggs and his security teams found this corridor and discovered what Trevor had been hiding. "Listen to me," Trevor said, kneeling so he was eye level with Ash. "Your mother is looking for you. She has been searching this whole time. We need to get you back to her." Flare whimpered and shook her head. She pressed closer to Trevor, refusing to let go. "I know you're scared," Trevor continued, his voice breaking. "But your family needs you. Your mother needs you." Ash made a frustrated sound. She looked around desperately, then grabbed a piece of debris with her claws and began scratching marks on the metal floor. Trevor watched as she drew crude images. Dragons fighting. Fire and explosions. Small figures running and hiding. You escaped during a battle, Trevor said slowly, piecing it together. You got away from whoever took you, but you were lost. You did not know how to get home. Ash nodded vigorously. She pointed at Trevor, then at herself and her siblings. She was trying to say something else, something important. You trust me, Trevor realized, but you do not trust anyone else. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. These children had been traumatized. They had been stolen, trapped, and had barely escaped with their lives. Of course they were terrified of strangers. Of course they had hidden instead of asking for help. And now Trevor had to convince them to face that fear. I will go with you, Trevor said suddenly. When we contact your mother, I will be there. I will make sure you're safe. I promise, Cinder chirped hopefully. Flare stopped crying and looked up at him with those huge golden eyes. Ash studied his face for a long moment, reading something there that Trevor himself did not understand. Finally, she nodded. Trevor pulled out his personal communicator, the cheap device he used for station messages. His finger hovered over the emergency broadcast button. Once he pressed it, everything would change. Security would come. The dragons would be taken. His quiet life would end. He thought about the first night when 3 starving children had looked at him from the shadows. He thought about the gifts they brought him, the meals they shared, the stories he told. He thought about how they had filled the empty space in his heart. He pressed the button. This is Trevor Walsh, he said into the communicator. I have information about the royal children. Briggs arrived in less than 5 minutes. He brought 4 other security officers, all of them armed with shock weapons and restraints. They surrounded Trevor's position in the service corridor with military precision. Briggs himself stood at the front, his weapon drawn and pointed directly at Trevor's chest. Step away from the creatures, Briggs ordered. Trevor did not move. The 3 dragons pressed against him, scales raised and smoke curling from their nostrils. Ash positioned herself between Trevor and the officers, her body tense and ready to fight. I said step away. No, Trevor replied calmly. Briggs's face turned red. You have been harboring stolen property of the Radiant Throne for months. Do you have any idea what you have done? They could destroy this entire station because of you. They are not property, Trevor said. They are children. One of the other officers shifted nervously. Sir, if those are really the royal children, we should contact the fleet immediately. We are not equipped to handle this situation. Shut up, Davies, Briggs snapped. He refocused on Trevor. Last chance. Step away or I will stun you and take them by force, Ash roared. The sound echoed through the corridor like thunder, and actual flames licked at her teeth. The officers stepped back involuntarily. Even Briggs looked shaken, though he kept his weapon steady. They will hurt you, Trevor said to Ash quietly. Do not fight them. Trust me, Ash growled but did not attack. Flare was crying again, clutching at Trevor's leg with her claws. Cinder trembled against his other side, her copper scales dimmed with fear. Briggs took a step forward. His finger tightened on the trigger. The world exploded into light. Trevor threw up his arm to shield his eyes as teleportation energy filled the corridor. When his vision cleared, 7 massive figures stood between him and the security officers. They were dragons, but nothing like the children. These were warriors, ancient and powerful, wearing ceremonial armor that glowed with its own inner light. The royal guard had arrived. Briggs and his officers dropped their weapons and fell to their knees. Even through his fear, Trevor felt a surge of relief. The children were safe now. Whatever happened to him, at least they would be protected. One of the guards, larger than the others, stepped forward. His scales were deep crimson and his eyes burned like coals. When he spoke, his voice made the metal walls vibrate. Where are the royal children? Ash chirped and rushed forward. The guard's fierce expression softened instantly. He lowered his massive head and nuzzled her gently, checking her for injuries. Cinder and Flare joined their sister, and suddenly the terrifying warriors became concerned parents fussing over lost children. Prepare for the Empress, the Crimson Guard commanded. The air shimmered again. This time the energy felt different, heavier, more powerful. Trevor's knees went weak and he had to fight the urge to collapse like Briggs had. She appeared like a goddess descending from heaven. Seraphine, Star Empress of the Radiant Throne, entered the corridor with a presence that defied description. She was twice the size of her guards, with scales that shifted between silver and gold depending on how the light caught them. Her wings, folded against her back, could have wrapped around the entire space. Power radiated from her like heat from a furnace. Every person in the corridor fell to their knees. Every person except Trevor. He could not explain why he remained standing. Perhaps it was stubbornness. Perhaps it was the knowledge that he had done nothing wrong. Perhaps it was simply that his legs refused to work anymore. Whatever the reason, he found himself standing upright while an empress who could incinerate him with a thought stared directly at him. Seraphine's eyes were the same gold as her children's, but older. Infinitely older. They held centuries of wisdom and power and barely contained rage. She looked at Trevor, then at her children clinging to his legs, then back at Trevor. The temperature in the corridor rose 10 degrees. "You," Seraphine said, her voice like silk wrapped around steel. "You are the one who kept my children?" Trevor's mouth was too dry to speak. He managed a nod. "You knew they were royal?" "Not at first," Trevor croaked. "Not until the fleet arrived. And yet you contacted us the moment you understood." Why, it was a test. Trevor could feel it. Every word he said next would determine whether he lived or died. "Because they needed their mother," Trevor said simply. "Because no matter how much I care about them, I am not their family." "You are." Seraphine tilted her head, studying him like a predator studies prey. The silence stretched until Trevor thought he might collapse from the tension. Then Ash did something unexpected. She left Trevor's side and walked to her mother. She looked up at the massive empress and spoke in the dragon tongue, her young voice clear and urgent. Seraphine listened, her expression unreadable. When Ash finished, she turned to Cinder and Flare. "Is this true?" Seraphine asked them. Both young dragons nodded and chirped in agreement. They looked back at Trevor with something that made his heart ache. Love, trust, gratitude. Seraphine was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke again, her voice had changed. The rage was gone, replaced by something Trevor could not identify. "My daughter tells me you fed them every night, that you kept them safe and asked nothing in return, that you told them stories and made them feel loved when they were lost and alone." Trevor nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty. She says you are theirs, that you belong to them as much as they belong to you." "I love them," Trevor said quietly. "I know I have no right to, but I do." Seraphine looked at him for what felt like an eternity. Then impossibly she smiled. "Trevor Walsh," the Star Empress said. "We need to talk." The Imperial flagship was beyond anything Trevor had imagined. He sat in a room that looked like it was carved from a single massive crystal, with windows showing the stars in perfect clarity. The furniture was sized for dragons, making him feel like a child in an adult's world. Guards stood at every entrance, their eyes tracking his smallest movement. Seraphine sat across from him, her massive form somehow elegant despite the confined space. Her children were beside her, finally clean and wearing proper royal garments. They looked different now, regal and important, but they kept glancing at Trevor with the same affection they had always shown. "Tell me everything," Seraphine commanded. From the beginning, Trevor did. He explained hearing noises behind his cart that first night, finding 3 starving dragons in the shadows, his decision to feed them despite the risk, the months of nightly meals and growing bonds, his slow realization that they were far more than simple creatures. Seraphine listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was silent for a long time. "They were taken during the Festival of Stars," she finally said. "A rival faction attacked the ceremony. My guards fought, but the enemy had planned well. They took my children and vanished into the transport lanes before we could stop them." Trevor saw pain flash across her ancient eyes. "We searched everywhere," Seraphine continued. "Every station, every planet, every hidden port in the outer spiral. I sent my best warriors. I offered rewards beyond counting. But the galaxy is vast and my children are small. For months I believed I would never see them again." Ash made a soft sound and pressed against her mother's side. Seraphine wrapped a wing around her daughter, and Trevor saw the Empress's composure crack for just a moment. She was not just a ruler. She was a mother who had lost her children. "They escaped near Station Meridian," Trevor said. "Got away during some kind of fight. But they were hurt and confused. They did not know how to get home. And they found you instead," Seraphine said, looking at him with those unsettling golden eyes. "A human cook on a forgotten trading post. Do you understand how remarkable that is? My children could have approached any of the thousands of beings on that station. They chose you." "I just fed them," Trevor said. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Seraphine said sharply. Most beings would have seen profit, a chance to ransom royal children for wealth and power. Others would have seen danger and turned away. You saw hungry children and asked for nothing. That is rare, Trevor Walsh. Rare enough to be precious. Trevor did not know what to say to that. He looked at the 3 dragons who had changed his life. Flair caught his eye and gave him a small smile, her first since boarding the flagship. In my culture, Seraphine said, there is a law older than empires. When someone saves the life of another's child, a debt is created, a bond that cannot be broken. You did not just save my children. You gave them safety, comfort, and love when they needed it most. They gave me the same things, Trevor replied honestly. I was alone, lost in my own way. They made me remember what it felt like to care about something other than survival. Seraphine studied him carefully. What is Earth like? The question surprised Trevor. He thought for a moment, remembering blue skies and green forests. It is beautiful, he said, chaotic and messy and full of life. Humans are not the strongest species or the smartest. We don't have scales or claws or natural weapons, but we adapt. We survive. We find ways to keep going even when everything seems hopeless. Is that why you left? Trevor felt old wounds open. I lost my family in the border wars, not to combat, but to one of the famines that came after. I could not save them. So I left Earth behind and tried to forget, tried to just exist without feeling anything. Until my children found you, Seraphine said softly. Until your children found me. Trevor agreed. Seraphine stood and walked to the window. The starlight made her scales glow like liquid metal. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. My empire is vast and powerful. We have conquered systems and ended wars. Other species fear us, and they should. But fear also creates distance. My children will inherit this throne someday. They will need strength and wisdom. But they will also need something else, something I cannot teach them. Trevor waited, unsure where this was going. They need to understand compassion, Seraphine said, turning back to face him. Not just for dragons, but for all beings. They need to see the galaxy through different eyes, to understand that power is not the only thing that matters. She walked back to Trevor and lowered her massive head until they were at eye level. My children need you, Trevor Walsh, not as a servant or a prisoner, as family, as someone who can show them what you showed them on that station. Kindness without expectation, love without condition, humanity at its best. Trevor's heart hammered in his chest. What are you saying? I am offering you a position in my court, royal companion to the imperial children. You would live here in the palace, care for them, teach them about the wider galaxy, help them become the rulers they are meant to be. Trevor looked at Ash, Cinder, and Flare. They were watching him with desperate hope in their eyes. They wanted this. They wanted him to stay. I am not a noble, Trevor said. I am not educated or important. I am just a cook. You are the person who saved my children, Seraphine said firmly. You are the person they trust completely. That makes you more valuable than any noble in my empire. So I ask you, Trevor Walsh, will you join my family? Trevor thought about his empty quarters on Station Meridian, his failing food cart, his lonely existence selling meals to strangers who never remembered his name. Then he thought about nightly dinners with 3 dragons who looked at him like he mattered, about telling stories and receiving gifts, about finding purpose again after years of drifting. He looked at Seraphine and smiled. Yes, Trevor said, I will stay. 5 years passed like a dream. Trevor stood on the balcony of his quarters watching the artificial sunset paint the palace gardens in shades of gold and purple. The Imperial Palace was built inside a massive station that orbited the dragon homeworld, a feat of engineering that still amazed him even after all this time. From here he could see young dragons practicing flight maneuvers in the training grounds below. 3 familiar shapes broke away from the group and soared toward his balcony. Ash landed first, her dark scales now gleaming with health and proper care. She had grown into a powerful young dragon, almost half her mother's size, with the same natural authority Seraphine possessed. But when she looked at Trevor, her eyes still held that same warmth from the first night they met. You are late for dinner, she said in perfect human speech. Her language skills had improved dramatically over the years. I was watching you train, Trevor replied. You have gotten faster. Cinder landed next, her copper scales bright in the fading light. She had become a scholar, constantly asking questions and studying everything from human history to quantum physics. She carried a datapad in her claws, probably full of notes from her latest research project. Did you know that Earth has over 7,000 spoken languages? Cinder asked excitedly. I have been studying them. Can you teach me more phrases in Mandarin? After dinner, Trevor promised. Flare was the last to land. She had grown into the most beautiful of the three, with scales that seemed to shift colors in the light. But more than her appearance, it was her gentle nature that stood out. She worked with the diplomatic corps now, using her natural empathy to bridge gaps between species that had been enemies for generations. She nuzzled Trevor's hand in greeting, a gesture she had never outgrown. Mother wants you to join her for the meal tonight, Flare said softly. She has something important to discuss. Trevor felt a flutter of nervousness. Even after 5 years, private dinners with the Star Empress still intimidated him. But he nodded and followed the 3 dragons inside. The royal dining hall was designed to accommodate both dragons and smaller species. Trevor's place was at a raised table that put him at eye level with Seraphine and her children. It was a position of honor, something that still made other courtiers whisper behind their claws. Seraphine was already waiting when they arrived. Age had not touched her, but Trevor thought he saw something different in her eyes. Contentment, perhaps. Peace, Trevor, she greeted him warmly. Thank you for joining us. They ate together as they had countless times before. Trevor had learned to cook dragon cuisine, blending human techniques with traditional recipes. Tonight he had prepared something special, a fusion dish that made even Seraphine hum with pleasure. You have outdone yourself, the Empress said. Special occasions deserve special food, Trevor replied. Seraphine tilted her head. You know what tonight is? 5 years since I came here. 5 years since you gave me a new family. The dragons fell silent. Ash looked at her mother, then at Trevor. Something unspoken passed between them. 5 years since you saved my children? Seraphine corrected gently. 5 years since you changed everything. Do you know what has happened in that time, Trevor Walsh? Trevor shook his head. The Radiant Throne has signed peace treaties with 17 species we have fought for centuries, Seraphine said. We have opened our borders to trade and cultural exchange. Other empires no longer fear us as they once did. Do you know why? Your wisdom? Trevor guessed. My children, Seraphine said, looking at Ash, Cinder, and Flare with obvious pride. They have become what I always hoped they would be. Strong, yes, but also compassionate. Curious about other cultures, willing to see beyond our own empire, and they learned that from you. Trevor felt his throat tighten with emotion. Ash has begun training with the Royal Guard, Seraphine continued, but she refuses to view other species as beneath us. She treats her soldiers with respect, regardless of their origin. Cinder has revolutionized our education system, incorporating knowledge from hundreds of worlds, and Flare has prevented 3 wars through negotiation alone. They are the future of our empire, and they are extraordinary. They were always extraordinary, Trevor said. I just fed them. Ash snorted smoke, a dragon's version of laughter. You did far more than feed us. You showed us what kindness looks like, what family means, how to be strong without being cruel. You taught us to be better, Cinder added. Flare simply reached out and touched Trevor's hand with her claw. Seraphine stood and walked around the table. She lowered her massive head until she was level with Trevor, her golden eyes capturing his completely. I brought you here to care for my children, Seraphine said, but you have done so much more. You have changed our empire. You have changed me. You reminded us all that power without compassion is meaningless, that the smallest act of kindness can echo across the stars. She touched her nose to Trevor's forehead, a gesture of deep respect among dragons. Thank you, Trevor Walsh, for saving my children, for joining our family, for showing us a better way. Trevor felt tears running down his face. He looked at the 4 dragons surrounding him, these incredible beings who had filled the empty spaces in his heart. He thought about that first night on Station Meridian, when 3 starving children had looked at him from the shadows. He thought about how a simple meal had changed everything. Thank you for letting me stay, Trevor whispered. That night, after dinner, they gathered in the garden like they used to in the service corridor. Trevor told stories while the dragons listened, their scales glowing softly in the starlight. Somewhere in the distance, music played and courtiers celebrated another peaceful day in the Empire. But here, in this quiet moment, there was only family, and that was everything.